So restorative practice is a values-based philosophy. So that's something I'm very passionate about, is that schools understand it as a philosophy, a way of thinking, a way of seeing things. But there are a set of skills. So I guess when we work in schools, the intention is twofold. So to build positive relationships consciously, intentionally, and on purpose, and to have a practice, a context, a way of thinking to respond to harm or challenges in a way that honors relationships. So it's proactive and responsive. And when I work in schools, I use an acronym. In primary schools, I use the FRIENDS acronym to make the values explicit, or I use a RESPECT acronym in a post-primary context to make the values explicit. And really, when you think about the impact in schools, think about restorative practice not just as a set of things we do, but as a framework for how we view teaching and learning. So when I think of restorative practice, I think of it as a vehicle to enhance a relational school culture. So culture in schools is about, here's our values, empathy, community, nurture, care. Schools will have a mission statement and ethos. Here's our values, and here's our actions and our practices and our language, and they match. When you think about growing a relational school culture or enhancing a relational school culture, I think it's really important that we bring all stakeholders with us. And I think first of all, we need to change the mindset or build the skills and language of the adults in the building so that they're modeling these practices. And then, of course, we try and build these skills literacy explicitly for the learner, for students. So they have conflict literacy skills, relational skills for life. And then parents and other stakeholders, I think we need to build goodwill and good times. So one of the main challenges I see in schools trying to grow its commitment to restorative practice is, a misimplementation of just engaging with the train and hope for the best model. I think that when we think about that idea of culture change, that it really requires consistent implementation. And I think that's what schools need to think about, is investment in time, not on a training day, but how are we going to live and implement this? I think another challenge that I see in schools is that they rush to maybe policy reform, or their entry point for committing to restorative practice is wanting to change policy. But of course, we have to make sure that policy and practice match. So to build the literacy skills, that way of thinking amongst the community is really key. So it's an authentic engagement or authentic policy reflecting practice. And I think it's trying to adapt and work within a system whilst trying to change system. Restorative practice is about changing that punitive structure that's deeply embedded in our culture to more of a restorative and relational one. But that takes time and nurturing, and I think continuous support for those that are committed to it within a school context. So one of the key things I think that we need to consider when working restoratively in schools is even moving away from the idea of behavior management, instead iterating to a switch from behavior to relationship keeping. Sometimes people misunderstand restorative practices, do what I say, but I'll ask you nicely. We're looking for conformity and compliance or tips and tricks. But we said it's a philosophy, and it's that way of thinking. So a traditional model and punitive model can sometimes isolate those who are the most vulnerable. In a restorative approach, I guess when we are looking at behavior, we're saying all behavior is communication. What is this communicating to us? And when we look at the needs or unmet needs underneath the behavior, then we can look at perhaps more adaptive approaches and seeking support, different ways of engaging. And it's not to say that we can always meet all of our students' needs all of the time. But when we think that way, we maintain an empathic bond, or the potential for change exists. So I think a school that's engaging in that restorative approach, that relational approach, it has an impact on engagement. I guess at the end of the day, good relationships are the foundation for effective teaching and learning, which is what schools are all about. So I think first and foremost, it's really key to model, the practices. So when I think of engaging, I'm not thinking of something, I'm thinking, how am I showing up? Who do I want to be in this situation? How am I thinking? How am I speaking? Am I modeling listening? Am I modeling de-escalation skills? Am I getting sucked into the power struggles, which can sometimes happen? So for sure, I think that idea of thinking about the internal landscape, how am I kind of modeling these practices for the young people, but also in my classroom, that idea of connection before curriculum, making sure that I'm doing maybe a little relational check-in, a little one-word quiz, just trying to connect intentionally with the students that I work with. It's those ways of those lenses, and having the literacy and language, the restorative questions, the restorative language to connect before we correct, and can really support those who are seeking to commit to that restorative approach in their own practice.